Hi there, this is Jeff Hinton. If you don't know who Jeff Hinton is, you probably shouldn't be in this room. Let's get right into it. So, I think one of the things that I find so frustrating discussing AI safety generally is that a lot of ideas get conflated into this kind of like toxic cloud of anxiety. And when you're actually dealing with a lot of separate problems, really, that require different solutions. And I wonder if you could just give us a sort of rough summary of what the biggest problems are in your mind.
So there's a whole bunch of them, but one of them is surveillance,
Okay.
which will help authoritarian states stay in power. There's lethal autonomous weapons, which we're going to see very soon. There's fake videos corrupting elections. There's job losses, which are going to increase the gap between rich and poor. There's cybercrime,
Yeah.
which is increasing rapidly. There's bioterrorism.
6.
There's the alignment problem, which is how are you sure that the AI is going to do something that you'd like when you tell it to do something?
Right.
And there's finally the existential threat that it will go rogue and take over.
So which one do you want to handle first? Which one do you worry most about of all of those problems?
So the existential threat is the one I've talked about the most,
Right.
but that's not the most urgent by a long way.
What's the most urgent?
I think surveillance is something to worry about. So AI is going to be very good at surveillance. It's going to help authoritarian regimes stay in power. Now, in the US,
Yeah.
the founders thought about this kind of thing, and they put in protections against it, like the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, the current Supreme Court isn't a very good protection.
Right.
You've got one guy who's probably a sexual predator. You've got another guy who takes so many bribes he can't keep count of them.
Right.
And you've got a third guy who's so keen to keep Trump out of jail that he's willing to contemplate that the president might be allowed to shoot his political opponents and not be legally liable.
Right. Oh. Starting a revolution here. As someone who has access to a lot of political figures, you consult with presidents and prime ministers and so on. I wonder, do you feel that they're even capable of addressing these problems at this moment? Like, we're in a moment of great political collapse, while we're exactly facing this new reality. They don't seem particularly capable of handling the old realities. Do you have a sense that they're even can address this problem?
It depends on which country you're in. So in the US, it's sort of paralyzed now by the fact that one of the parties is dedicated to a lie.
Right.
So you can't get much done there. The White House is doing what it can, but it's difficult because they can't get legislation passed.
Right.
In some other countries, they can do more, but it's difficult. So, for example, in all of these countries that are making up regulations, the regulations always have a little clause in them that say, none of these regulations apply to military uses of AI. So defense departments won't allow governments to rule out lethal autonomous weapons.
Europe has taken some steps in that direction. How do you feel about the European legislation around lethal autonomous weapons?
So if you look at the European legislation, there's an explicit clause in there that simply says, none of these regulations apply to military applications of AI.
Right. So that's
So
a bit
much for that.
terrifying. So how do you imagine, what do you imagine what's going to happen to this? Do you think people are going to use these and realize they're so terrible that they're unusable?
So I think for lethal autonomous weapons, it'll be like chemical weapons. So after the First World War, people realized they were so terrible that they had Geneva Conventions, and they pretty much held. Putin isn't using chemical weapons in the Ukraine, at least not yet.
Right.
So it's pretty much worked, and we may get that for lethal autonomous weapons, but not until we've seen how awful they are.
I've never really, how do you imagine lethal autonomous, can you tell me what that would look like? The use of lethal autonomous weapons in AI, like what it would do?
Just imagine something creeping up behind you that's intent on killing you.
Yeah, that does it. And you wouldn't even notice. It would be,
Right.
Yeah, it would just be there. Okay, so I think everyone kind of agrees with these sort of political problems we all know how to face, or we know that they're political problems. But the other ones, particularly the alignment problem and the existential problem, they have a lot more debate around. And they have, particularly, let's talk about the alignment problem first of all. I mean, how do you see a solution to the alignment problem, or why is it so hard to find a solution?
So, well, one reason is if you give an AI some goals, and the AI's got the ability to create sub-goals, which it will have, you're not necessarily sure which sub-goals it will create. If it's smart, you can rely on it not creating sort of sub-goals that are clearly not what you wanted. So, for example, if you give it the goal of stopping climate change, the obvious way to do that is to get rid of people. But it'll be smart enough to realize that's not what you meant. But there's other cases where even you may not be quite sure what you expect to happen. And also, there's cases where different people have very different goals. So people talk about the alignment problem as if we all agree on what's good to do and what's not good to do.
Right, and we don't at all.
So there's, for example, some people think it's good to drop 2,000-pound bombs on children, and other people don't. They've both got their reasons.
Well, also,
but you can't align with both of them.
You can't align with both of them. But do you think, I mean, the alignment problem, is the problem that is the problem within the technology itself? Or is it just the fact that the technology makes us realize that actually there is no such thing as human values? There's just Western values, there's Chinese values, there's values in different places around the world, and we're in a polyvalent world with different systems of meaning. Which of these do you think is more difficult?
I don't know which is more difficult. They're obviously very different problems.
Right.
I think actually the biggest problem is we don't align with each other.
Right.
So you're going to introduce these very intelligent things, and they're going to have a big problem knowing what to do.
Yeah, I mean, do you think there's something ironic in the fact that, you know, this portrait of humanity failing to deal with AI, that there's something ironic in the fact that we don't seem to be intelligent enough to deal with the intelligence that we've managed to create?
I think, yeah, if you put a whole bunch of people together, they can get very stupid.
Right, right. They can, and is that also true for artificial intelligence? I mean, it can also be very stupid, right?
Maybe.
Right.
But actually what you're going to see is maybe a few of these superintelligences, each with many copies of itself. And at least all the different copies of the same superintelligence will be able to communicate very well. Right.
I mean, you know, one thing, when I thought about the question that we were trying to answer today, which is, can we control artificial intelligence? You know, the question that seems to naturally flow out of that is, what is artificial intelligence? What, do we even understand what it is? I recently interviewed Noam Shazir of Google, and I asked him how much we understand AI, and he said we're roughly where we were in chemistry in the 12th century. We're in alchemy. We don't really know what is happening here. I wonder if you feel that way, and if so, how do you control something that you can't even really grasp?
I probably don't feel that way quite as much as Noam does.
Right.
I think we do know quite a lot of what's happening in Transformers, but we certainly can't say when it makes a decision why it made the decision. We can't say that succinctly. And there's an analogy here.
Right.
If you take a physicist and ask him if he understands what happens when a leaf falls off a tree. So the leaf kind of goes like this, and it'll land on the ground somewhere, which depends on the wind and the precise angle it first fell off at and stuff.
Yeah.
So the physicist can't predict where the leaf's going to hit the ground, and it can't predict the exact trajectory of the leaf. But nevertheless, he feels he sort of understands what's going on. And I think that's where we are with AI, with Transformers.
But is it that the leaf might fall on one side on bombing children and the leaf might fall on another side on not?
No, it's not like that. It's just that the precise details of how a transformer decided to make this be the next word, we don't understand that. But we do sort of understand what it's doing in the way we sort of understand what's happening when a leaf falls off a tree.
Right. I mean, your work on the existential threat of, you know, it's very interesting. Now there are really kind of two schools that are emerging. There's the kind of school of Yann LeCun, who was your fellow Turing Award winner, who really feels that these are statistical pattern machines and that this apocalyptic view is something inherited from the movies and does not really meet the case of what we're dealing with. And then there's the emerging Hintonian view, where the existential threat is a very real possibility. And I wonder, how did you, like what, and this is very recent for you as I understand too. It's only about a year ago that you came to this conclusion. What made you come to that conclusion?
So while I was still at Google, I was working on analog computation, trying to figure out if you could use analog computation to use much less energy for doing large language models.
Right.
And the idea was, it used to be that a computer had to do exactly what you said, because the way you got it to do things was by giving it a program to do those things. Now that everything's changed, the way you get a computer to do something is you show it some examples. You program a learning algorithm, but then for specific things you want it to do, you show it examples. And that gives the possibility of having analog computation, where every analog computer is a bit different. It doesn't do exactly what you tell it to, and it learns its way around its peculiarities. And that's much more energy efficient.
Right.
But there's a big problem with it, which is two analog computers can't communicate what they know to each other,
Right.
because they work in slightly different ways. If you have two copies of the same digital model, they use their weights in exactly the same way, and so they can share gradients. They can share really efficiently.
Right.
They can share trillions of bits. But if you have two analog computers that have learned to use their own peculiarities to do the computations efficiently, the only way they can share what they know is by, for example, producing a sentence, and the other one tries to figure out how to change its weight so it might have said that,
Right.
like we're doing now.
And that's
as you can see,
useless as
this is
human beings.
very inefficient.
Right. Very inefficient. Right.
So that's what made me suddenly realize digital computation is actually much better. It's much more energy expensive, but it's actually much better for sharing. And that's what got me scared that these things might be better than us.
Well, then why were you why were you so interested in moral computing if it was so much more limited in its perspectives?
Because
is
it
that
was-
why you left Google, to pursue that?
No, I left Google because I was 75.
Right.
And I wanted a break.
Right.
And to watch a lot of Netflix.
Right.
But also, as I left Google, I figured I could just warn that the existential threat, the threat that in the long run, these things get smarter than us and might go rogue, that's not science fiction like Aidan Gomez thinks. That's real.
Okay, I would like a very specific description of how this might happen. Literally a film scenario.
Okay.
Yeah.
I won't give you quite as specific as you want. but
Okay.
in order to make AI agents, you have to give them the ability to create sub-goals.
Pardon me?
You have to give an agent the ability to create a sub-goal.
Okay, yeah,
Like if you want to get to Europe, your sub-goal is to get to the airport.
right.
And you can focus on achieving that sub-goal.
Right.
AI agents will be the same. Now, as soon as you give something the ability to create a sub-goal to get stuff done, it'll realize there's a very good sub-goal that works for almost everything, which is get more control. So if I can get more control, I can get stuff done better. So even if I'm totally benevolent and I just want to achieve what you asked me to achieve, I'll realize that if I get more control, it'll be easier to do that. And actually, if these things are much smarter than us, they'll realize just take the control away from the people and we'll be able to achieve what they want much more efficiently. And that seems to me like a very slippery path, because if you ever get an agent that gets any kind of self-interest, then it'll say, well, you know, if I had a few more data centers of that other superintelligence, I'd be able to get a bit smarter. So I'd be able to protect my interests a bit better. And then you'll get evolution. And once you get evolution, you'll get all this nasty competitive stuff.
But you must understand that there is a whole series of spiritual assumptions underlying that description you just gave. I mean, for one, that the best avenue to an outcome is control, which seems to me like a very human understanding of the truth, of answers even.
I'm not convinced by that. I think that
But don't you-
generally is the best way to get
But I
something.
sort of assume that our need to dominate, our need to control, that part of our intelligence that is obviously there is our ape brain, right? That's our biological impulse, which a machine would not have.
No, I don't think it's just that. I think it's genuinely the case that if you want to get stuff done, getting more control helps, whatever kind of being you are.
So what would would this be like a military system that decides that it would achieve its goals better, or is it the paperclip algorithm like that from the video game?
The good outcome would be
Yeah,
that a superintelligence just starts running everything
yeah.
and looks after us, and we're kind of pets of a superintelligence.
Right.
That's Elon Musk's view of it.
Right.
And that's the good outcome.
Maybe it's already there. Maybe it hasn't told us. Maybe that's part of its control.
Maybe it's getting more like that all the time, right?
Right. So, you know, the World's Safety Initiative people are here. There are now hundreds of these institutes around the world. tell them what you think they should do.
Okay, so for most things, I have no idea what they should do.
Okay.
I've got a couple of suggestions.
Right. Yeah.
One is for the existential threat. The only thing powerful enough to make the big companies invest significant amounts of money in doing experiments on that when they have things not quite as intelligent as us, and I believe you really need empirical experiments.
Right.
The only thing that can force them to do that rather than take more profits is governments. So I think governments should be involved in forcing the big AI companies to do lots of safety experiments. That's one suggestion.
Right.
And the reason Ilya left OpenAI, for example, is probably, he hasn't told me explicitly, but it's probably because they wouldn't put enough effort into safety.
Right. I mean,
so that's one suggestion.
Okay, another?
I have another suggestion,
Please.
which is one of the dangers we didn't talk about in detail is fake videos corrupting elections. We're going to see a lot of that this year.
Yeah.
And my suggestion is we should try and inoculate the public. So I was at a meeting with a bunch of billionaire philanthropists who wanted to know what they could do to help.
Yeah.
And my suggestion was pay for a lot of advertisements where you have a very convincing fake video, and then right at the end of it, it says, this was a fake video. That was not Trump, and he never said anything like that. Or that was not Biden, and he never said anything like that. And it's just like inoculation. You have a version of it that's then attenuated by saying it was a fake one so that people can build up resistance.
An inoculation to virality, essentially.
Right.
Right.
So you basically you need to get R, which is the number of retweets, below 1.
Right. Right. I mean, we have about a minute left. I'd like to ask sort of two questions. One is, I think, the AI space, at least as I see it, is sort of overwhelmed with this pessimism, right? Like all of these problems that we're talking about, which are very surreal. What if it all works out? What if we do AI and suddenly the government comes to its senses and the tech world comes to its senses and we do everything great? What does it look like?
That would be wonderful. And also I want to
What would it look like, though?
No, I want to correct something.
Yeah.
We've just talked about the downsides. Okay?
Right.
All the bad things that might happen.
Right.
There's an equal number of wonderful things that are going to happen.
Right.
Like, for example, in medicine, instead of going to your family doctor, you're going to be able to go to a doctor who's seen 100 million patients and knows your whole genome and the results of all your tests and the results of all your relative tests and has seen thousands of cases of this extremely rare disease you have and can just diagnose you right. And in North America, there's more than 200,000 people a year die of poor diagnoses.
Right.
Already, a doctor on difficult diagnoses, doctors get 40% correct, AI gets 50% correct,
Right.
and AI with a doctor gets 60% correct. So that's already like 50,000 people saved right there every year. So there's going to be wonderful things, particularly in healthcare, but actually anywhere where you want to make a prediction. So there's going to be huge increases in productivity. The problem is, in our political system, to turn those huge increases in productivity into benefits for everybody.
So the problem is us. It's not the machines.
The problem's always us.
The problem is always us. Jeff Hinton. Okay.